In the aftermath of the Great Trojan War, as the city of Troy lay in ruins, many Greek heroes set sail for home. But among them, none had a journey as long, perilous, and full of trials as Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. His adventure, which would stretch over 10 long years, was a tale of cunning, endurance, and relentless determination to return to his beloved wife, Penelope, and his son Telemachus. This is the story of the Odyssey of Odysseus, a journey marked by gods and monsters, temptations and betrayals, where every step forward brought new challenges that tested the hero's strength, intelligence, and heart. All began the day Paris of Troy abducted Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Enraged, Menelaus called upon all kings of Greece, including Odysseus, as all had once vowed to defend the honor of Helen, if someone ever tried to insult her. Odysseus, however, tried to escape the promise made to Menelaus by feigning insanity. Agamemnon, the brother of Menelaus, proved Odysseus to be lying, and henceforth the legendary warrior set out for Troy, along with Agamemnon the lord of men, Achilles the invincible, Nestor he wise, and Teucer the master archer, as they were called. 10 years had passed since the Greeks attacked Troy, and they were all still there, outside the strong walls, fighting with the locals, who proved themselves brave warriors. In the 10th year of the war, Odysseus the Cunning, the most trusted advisor and counselor of King Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks, devised a plan to deceive the Trojans. He wanted to make them believe that the Greeks had lost their nerves and had returned back to Greece. In the middle of the night, the Greeks deserted Troy, leaving only a gigantic wooden horse on wheels outside the gates of the city. When dawn broke, the Trojans were surprised to see no Greek army surrounding them, only a wooden horse. They indeed believed that the Greeks had gone and had left this horse as a gift to the gods, to give them a good sea trip. Thus they wheeled the wooden horse into their city and started revelry to celebrate the end of the war. However, unknown to the Trojans, Odysseus had built a hollow into the wooden horse to hide there a few Greek warriors. This plan was the only way to gain entry to the city that had held its defenses for so many years. Now that they were inside, Odysseus and his men went out the dummy horse and slaughtered the unsuspecting guards. Then they opened the city gates and allowed the entire Greek army, who were hiding some miles away, to enter the city. After 10 grueling years of war, the Greeks finally achieved victory over Troy with the Trojan horse, devised by none other than Odysseus himself. The Greek armies looted Troy, burned it to the ground, and then sailed away, eager to return to their homes. Odysseus, proud of his cunning and eager to reunite with his family in Ithaca, set out with his crew of men. Yet the gods, who had witnessed the destruction of Troy, were not all pleased with the Greeks. Poseidon, the god of the sea, had a particular grudge against Odysseus for blinding his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and thus began the heroes' long and arduous journey home. Early in their voyage, Odysseus and his men encountered their first trial. Odysseus and his legion set sail from Troy aboard 12 ships. Tranquil waters facilitated the movement of the ships, and they were well out to sea. After a few days, they sighted land, and Eurylochus, second in command to Odysseus, convinced him to weigh anchor, go ashore and devastate the city with the assurance that they would not be harmed. Seeing the ships weigh anchor and thenceforth the warriors coming ashore, the Ciconians, the local residents, fled to the nearby mountains. Odysseus and his men plundered and looted the empty city. However, The men of Odysseus resisted his efforts to get them back aboard the ship immediately, and after a hearty meal accompanied by wine that flew like water, they fell asleep on the shore. Before the first light, the Ciconians returned with their fierce neighbors and set upon the warriors, killing as many as they could. Odysseus and his men beat a hasty retreat to their ships, but heavy damages had already been inflicted on their number. Berating himself for having listened to Eurylochus and thereafter losing so many valuable men, Odysseus and Eurylochus fought with each other, but they were separated by their fellow men, and peace was once again established amidst the warriors. After many days at sea, they landed on an island inhabited by the Lotus Eaters, a peaceful people who offered the men sweet lotus flowers to eat. But these flowers were no ordinary food. They made those who ate them forget everything: their homes, their loved ones, and their desire to return. Several of Odysseus's men, entranced by the effects of the lotus, wanted to remain on the island forever, their minds clouded with blissful oblivion. Realizing the danger, Odysseus forcefully dragged them back to the ships and commanded his remaining men to set sail immediately. The yearning for home was too strong in his heart to be lost to the pleasures of forgetfulness. Not long after, Odysseus and his crew found themselves on an island inhabited by the fearsome Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who lived as shepherds. A few minutes' walk from the ships brought them to the mouth of a gigantic cave. Curious, the warriors entered the cave and found it to be the habitation of some gigantic being. Further on, they found flocks of sheep inside the cave, and being hungry, they slaughtered a few of them and feasted on their flesh. Unknown to them, this was the lair of Polyphemus the Cyclops, and this land was the home of the gigantic Cyclopes. Returning to his cave, Polyphemus blocked the entrance with a huge rock, as he usually did. Odysseus and his men ran towards the entrance, but they were dismayed at the sight that greeted them. Here was a huge rock preventing their escape from a being that was even bigger than the rock. Laying his only eye on the warriors, Polyphemus asked who they were. Without revealing their identity or mission, Odysseus told Polyphemus they were seafarers who had lost their way and had come ashore looking for food. Unhappy that his sheep had been killed and eaten by these men, Polyphemus refused them to exit his cave. Every day he made a meal of 2 brave warriors, dashing their brains out on the walls of the cave and chewing them raw. Unable to bear this act of cruelty, Odysseus devised a plan to get them out. He had with him a gourd of strong wine, and one day he offered it to Polyphemus, who grabbed it and poured it down his throat greedily. The wine made the Cyclops drowsy, and within minutes he fell asleep. Odysseus and his remaining men took a red-hot poker from the fireplace and thrust it into the Cyclops' only eye, blinding him. The sleeping giant awoke in shock, howling in pain and bellowing in rage, demanding to know who had done this. Yet again Odysseus' presence of mind proved of the very essence, and he shouted out that his name was Nobody. Polyphemus, now on his feet and stumbling around, created such a commotion that his fellow Cyclops came running to his lair to see what had happened. When they stood outside the cave and asked Polyphemus what had happened, the Cyclops said that Nobody had blinded him. The other Cyclopes laughed out loud, called him an idiot, and told him there was nothing they could do, for Nobody had hurt him. The following morning, Odysseus and his men strapped themselves to the belly of the sheep, and in this manner, they escaped when Polyphemus let his flocks out of his lair to graze. Once outside, the warriors ran to the safety of their ships. Odysseus, however, priding his brilliance, could not resist taunting Polyphemus. The moment they set sail, he shouted out to the Cyclops that it was he, Odysseus, who had blinded him. Enraged and unable to see, Polyphemus threw a massive rock in the direction of the voice. Luckily for Odysseus, it fell short of its target, for else his ship would have been smashed. Polyphemus cried out to his father, the sea god Poseidon, to avenge this ignominy, and hereafter Odysseus became a sworn enemy of Poseidon. After escaping the Cyclopes, Odysseus and his crew came upon the island of Aeolus, the god of the winds. Aeolus, impressed by Odysseus's cunning, gave him a gift: a leather bag containing all the winds of the world, except for the west wind, which would blow them safely home to Ithaca. For 9 days and nights, Odysseus and his men sailed, and Ithaca came within sight. However, just as they neared home, Odysseus's curious crew, thinking the bag contained treasure, opened it. All the winds escaped in a furious storm, blowing them far off course and back to the open sea. Desperate, Odysseus returned to Aeolus's island to ask for help again, but Aeolus, believing that the gods had cursed Odysseus, refused to assist them a second time. Odysseus and his crew next landed in the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. Hoping for rest, they sent a few men to explore the island. The Laestrygonians, however, attacked them, seizing the explorers and feasting on them. Panicked, Odysseus ordered his remaining men to flee. As they raced back to their ships, the Laestrygonians threw huge rocks at them, sinking most of the fleet. Only Odysseus's ship escaped, but now his crew was greatly diminished. With heavy hearts, Odysseus and his remaining crew reached the island of Aemaia, home to the powerful sorceress and enchantress Circe. When they explored the island, they found Circe's palace, where she welcomed them with food and drink. However, the food was enchanted, and upon eating it, Odysseus's men were transformed into pigs. Horrified, Odysseus set out to rescue his men. On his way, the god Hermes appeared and gave him a magical herb called moly, which would protect him from Circe's spells. Armed with the moly, Odysseus confronted Circe, who, impressed by his resistance to her magic, agreed to turn his men back into humans. Odysseus and his crew remained with Circe for a year, during which she and Odysseus became lovers. However, the longing to return home eventually stirred in Odysseus's heart once more, and he asked Circe to help them leave. Circe advised him that before he could return to Ithaca, he must first travel to the Underworld to seek the wisdom of the blind prophet Tiresias. Odysseus and his men sailed to the edge of the world, where they descended into the dark and eerie realm of the Underworld. There, Odysseus met the spirits of the dead, including his fallen comrades from the Trojan War and even his own mother, who had died of grief waiting for his return. Finally, Tiresias appeared and warned Odysseus of the trials still to come. He foretold that Odysseus would face great hardship, especially when he returned to Ithaca, where suitors would be vying for his wife's hand. Tiresias also warned him to avoid the island of the sun god Helios, for harm to the god's sacred cattle would spell disaster. As Odysseus and his men sailed on, they approached the deadly sirens, whose songs lured sailors to their doom. Following Circe's warning, Odysseus ordered his men to plug their ears with wax and had himself tightly bound to the ship's mast, determined to hear their song without risking his life. As the ship drew close, Odysseus was overwhelmed by the beauty of the sirens' voices. Desperate to reach them, He strained against his bonds, pleading with his crew to release him. But his men, ears safely blocked, rowed on, unable to hear either the sirens or Odysseus's cries. Gradually, the song faded as they sailed beyond the sirens' reach, leaving Odysseus exhausted yet alive. Next, they came upon the narrow strait guarded by the sea monsters Scylla and Charybdis. On one side, Scylla, a six-headed monster, devoured sailors from ships that passed too close. On the other, Charybdis created a whirlpool that could swallow entire ships. With no safe passage, Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla, sacrificing a few men rather than risking the destruction of the entire ship. Despite Tiresias's warning, hunger forced Odysseus and his men to land on the island of Helios, the sun god. Odysseus warned his men not to touch the sacred cattle, but while he slept, they succumbed to temptation and slaughtered the cattle for food. Furious, Helios demanded that Zeus punish them. As soon as they set sail again, Zeus unleashed a storm that destroyed their ship and killed everyone except Odysseus. Clinging to the wreckage, Odysseus was swept through the sea for many days until he washed ashore on the island of Ogygia, home of the nymph Calypso. On Ogygia, Odysseus was held captive by the nymph Calypso, who fell in love with him and offered him immortality if he stayed with her. For 7 years, Odysseus lived on the island, longing to return to Ithaca but unable to escape. Finally, the gods took pity on him. Athena pleaded with Zeus to let Odysseus return home, and Zeus sent Hermes to command Calypso to release him. Reluctantly, Calypso obeyed, and Odysseus set out once more on a raft, driven by the hope of finally reaching Ithaca. After more trials, Odysseus finally arrived on the shores of Ithaca, but his troubles were far from over. Telemachus, the son of Odysseus who had just turned 20, decided to set out in search of his long-gone father. His mother had woes of her own. She was constantly plagued by suitors asking for her hand, since 10 years had passed from the end of the Trojan War and her husband had not returned. Day after day, she fended off their advances with an ingenious trick. She told the suitors that she was weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus' father, and only when it was complete would she even think to marry any one of them. Penelope's trick was to weave the cloth in the daytime and undo it at night, so the suitors were kept waiting indefinitely until her husband would return. However, a chambermaid betrayed her to the suitors, and soon they were back, asking for her hand and the kingdom of Ithaca. Knowing that his mother was successfully keeping her 108 suitors away, Telemachus decided to set out on his quest. Aided by goddess Athena and along with some of his faithful warriors, he went to Sparta to meet Menelaus and ask him if he had any news from his father. Unfortunately, Menelaus knew nothing, and Telemachus, disappointed, returned to Ithaca. The arrival of Odysseus on Ithaca went unnoticed, and, in the guise of a beggar, he approached the palace. He first met his old servants and his beloved son, Telemachus. From them, he learnt about the suitors that have been bothering Penelope for so long. Odysseus, still in the form of a beggar, he met his wife, who didn't recognize him. He told her about her husband's bravery and how he had helped in winning the Trojan War. These tales brought tears to her eyes. Calming herself, she approached the suitors who were always hanging around the palace and set them a simple task. Penelope would marry any one of them who could string Odysseus' bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe handles joined together. The suitors pushed and shoved each other to be the first to succeed, but little did they know that the task they faced was impossible. Stringing the bow that belonged to Odysseus was not an easy task, for it required not brute strength but dexterity. One by one, each suitor tried his luck, but to no avail. Finally, Odysseus picked up the bow, stringing it with ease and in one fluid motion letting fly an arrow that pierced all the 12 axe handles. After that, there was chaos. Revealing his true identity, Odysseus began massacring the suitors and, aided by Telemachus and the swineherd Eumaeus, they had soon cleared the court of all 108 of them. The suitors were killed, and the maidservants, who had made themselves the pleasure slaves of the suitors, were all hung. When Penelope heard the massacre, she ran to the court. Fazed by the sudden spate of events, she refused to believe that this strange beggar was indeed her long-lost husband Odysseus, so she set up another test for him. In front of Odysseus, Penelope ordered the palace servants to remove the bed from her bedchamber to the hall outside. On hearing this, Odysseus bristled with anger and opposed the idea, saying that this bed had been fashioned out of a living oak by his own hand and none, save a god, none in the whole world could move it. Joyful, Penelope rushed to Odysseus and hugged him, with big tears in her eyes, for she was reassured that this man was her beloved husband returned to her. Only Odysseus knew the secret about their bed, and his words were the proof she needed to believe him. Though Odysseus had reclaimed his kingdom, Tiresias's prophecy foretold one final journey. Odysseus, now older and wiser, would set out once more to make peace with Poseidon by carrying an oar to a distant land where the sea was unknown. And thus, the story of the Odyssey ended, with Odysseus finally at peace after his long and tumultuous journey, his heart forever bound to Ithaca, Penelope, and the home he had fought so hard to reclaim.